Almost 56 years ago, in June 1959, here at Rhodes University, in our great hall, a cut-down version of the famous musical King Kong was performed. Playing in the orchestra was a 20-year-old trumpeter, today's honorary graduand, Hugh Masekela. One of the lead singers that night was Miriam Makeba, who would also later receive a Rhodes honorary doctorate in 2004. It is quite clear that quite soon we are going to get a second performance, 56 years later, from our graduand. The year 1959 marked the takeoff of a glittering musical career for Hugh Masekela, as King Kong went on a year-long tour of South Africa, playing to sold-out audiences. This may have been the takeoff, but not the beginning of his life in music. "I lived for music since I could think," he once said. Born in Witbank, a town surrounded by coal mines and coal trains, he remembers that even when the burning coal and the dust blackened out the sun, we still had music to sing our sorrow and illuminate our ecstasy. It was there that music first captured his soul, listening to records on a wind-up gramophone. At the age of 4, hearing the Jazz Maniacs playing at his aunt's wedding reception, listening to miners singing traditional songs in his grandmother's shebeen. At a young age, being given piano lessons and soon playing excerpts from Mozart and Beethoven. Then, at the age of 14, sneaking away from school to see a movie in which Kirk Douglas starred as a talented jazz musician, and then leaving the cinema, determined to become a trumpet player. In this resolve, he was assisted by Trevor Huddleston, the British anti-apartheid priest who ministered in Johannesburg's black townships. He obtained a trumpet for the teenager, initiating a decades-long career. So Hugh was soon playing in a group of young musicians, the Huddleston Jazz Band, before, at the age of 20, joining the Jazz Epistles, playing alongside the likes of Kippie Moeketsi and Dollar Brand, as he was then known, now Abdullah Ibrahim, another recipient of a Rhodes honorary doctorate. Then came the Sharpeville Massacre in 1960 and the start of a 30-year exile for Hugh Masekela, first in London for a short spell and then off to the US, studying classical trumpet at the Manhattan School of Music in New York from 1960 to 64. Especially important were the contacts he established in the US. Tutored by Dizzy Gillespie, befriended by the singer Harry Belafonte, who gave support and encouragement. Advised by Miles Davis, who told him to keep on doing his own thing rather than copying American jazz styles. Important advice that was duly followed. After moving to California in 1966, he was playing Afrobeat music in concerts. Among these, the famous 1967 Monterey Pop Festival, the first outdoor festival of the 1960s, where he performed alongside Janis Joplin, The Who, Jimi Hendrix, among others. In the meantime, his first solo album, Trumpet Africaine, had been recorded in 1963 to be followed by many others, among the most famous of which was Grazing in the Grass in 1968. This went to the top of the US charts, became a worldwide hit, and was nominated for a Grammy Award. Growing international acclaim had its rewards, but was not all satisfying for Hugh Masekela. His heart was still in Africa. His musical style, as implored by Miles Davis, fed off African rather than American influences, a mixture of Afrobeat, jazz, bebop. It has been said that it was rather he who had the influence on American jazz. So in the 1970s and 80s, there was more direct contact with Africa on his part. In 1974, organising a music festival in what was then Zaire, now the DRC, arranged alongside the famous Rumble in the Jungle world heavyweight fight between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. Then later collaborating with a grassroots Ghanaian band, Hedzola Sounds. One of their albums included the famous composition Stimela. In the earlier 1980s, he came even closer to home, moving to Botswana, there starting an international school of music and later setting up a mobile studio. But the massacre of a number of anti-apartheid activists during a South African Defence Force raid into Botswana in 1985 forced him to leave the country and head for London, there recording one of South Africa's most iconic songs, Bring Him Back Home, a call for the release of Nelson Mandela. Not long after joining with Paul Simon and Ladysmith Black Mambazo in the famous Graceland tour in the late 1980s, Hugh Masekela was finally able to return to South Africa from exile in 1990, back to the country which ignites his passion and generates his creative energy. I am what I am because of the people of South Africa, he says. Everything that I have, I've got through them. I sing their music. Such was the pain of a 30-year exile that he believes his career only started in 1990, launching his first major South African concert tour in 1991, along with Sankomoto and Bayete. A later highlight was to perform in both the 2010 World Cup kickoff concert and the opening ceremony of the tournament. And he is still in demand internationally, playing in concerts in the US last month and due to play in England and Germany in June. So this career that has produced over 40 albums and included many concerts and tours is still going strong. A career, too, that has earned awards too numerous to list. Hugh Masekela's music has reflected his life experience, conveying the struggles and pain, the joys and passions of South Africa. A music of protest against oppression, exploitation and injustice, all embodied in the apartheid system that drove him into exile. He has striven to give back to his country, establishing the Musicians and Artists Assistance Programme of South Africa, which runs a scheme to address substance abuse in the creative community, serving as a director of a non-profit organisation that provides meals for learners in Soweto schools, supporting various HIV/AIDS campaigns. Tonight we honour Bra Hugh, a world-renowned trumpeter, band leader, composer, singer and lyricist. Also a mentor, a commentator, a defiant political voice, described too as a cross-generational reference point for South African cultural life. A living legend and musical genius who has enthralled music lovers and dazzled audiences across the world for almost 60 years. Mr. Chancellor, I have the honour to request you to confer on Hugh Masekela the degree of Doctor of Music, honoris causa.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, graduates, and thank you for the generosity and the joy. I'm very, very humbled to be here today. My father, Thomas Hugh Masekela, was a poor Limpopo farmer's son from Botlokwa, and he studied to be a school teacher at Kilnerton Training Institute, and not being happy being a teacher, he became a police sergeant in a Benoni township, and while he was there, he studied to be a health inspector. He later became a mining clerk, but one of his biggest wishes was to have had a degree. And when I came to live in Botswana and later on came back home, whenever I introduced him to any of my friends, the first thing he'd always ask them is, "Do you have a degree?" He was in awe of university graduates, and most of my friends had degrees, and he'd always look at me when they told him they had degrees. And I had a wife who had like 3 degrees, and he'd say to her the first time he met her, "How can you live with such an illiterate man and have like 3 degrees?" And in the last 4 years, I think this is the 4th doctorate that I'm getting here today, and I'm sure that he's chuckling in his grave. So here's to you, Salima. And we're living in an age where, especially African society that is fragmented all over the world, we're fragmented and convinced over the centuries that we're not the same people. But because of military defeat, which later went into colonization and slavery, and much later we were urbanized, and because of a misunderstanding of education, politicization, and to a great extent religion, in the last 3 centuries we're almost peaking where we've been as a society, almost totally consumed by foreign cultures. We're at a point where we have been convinced that our own heritage is savage and barbaric, that it is heathen and pagan, that it is backward, and all of those kind of rubbish heap names. And if we do not restore some kind of heritage back into our lives, if we don't find out who our parental and ancestral lineage is, if like we stop hiding our aged and ask them who we are, if we don't learn our praise poetry and our songs of old and our folklore, if we don't learn the arts and crafts and artisanships of our people, if we don't learn the songs and dances and the history of those who came long before us, and if we don't know the glories that we came from before we were enslaved, then 20 years or so from now, when our children are asked who they are, they're probably going to say, "They say we used to be Africans long ago." And it's something that we may chuckle about, but we're living in an age where most Africans, especially the new urban Africans in their homes, the children don't speak the mother tongue. So we are the first society in human history to be that totally absorbed by other cultures, to a point where we don't even aware that we spend hundreds of billions of dollars on artifacts and things that were introduced to us through colonialism. And we spent, for instance, about $100 billion just on other people's hair. And as a society, we don't have that kind of money, so where we are pulling it from is a miracle. And if we can create a miracle like that, then we can create the miracle to bring back some of who we really are, so that the children of the future can know who they are, and maybe if they do, we can really achieve much more than we can, because there is no society that is as diversely talented as African society internationally. And once we can, we're more than the Chinese also, by the way. And but we've been told that we have to now study Mandarin, and our children are going to speak Mandarin, many of them, before they can speak their own mother languages. So we're living in a very dangerous time, and I appeal to our graduates today and all sensible people, whether they're of African origin or not, to consider this and help us bring heritage back into our lives. And in conclusion, I'm going to sing a short song for you that I learned from one of the greatest daughters of heritage in Africa, whose great-grandmother, grandmother, and mother were all traditional healers, and she was a walking anthology of traditional music from all over Southern and Central Africa, and made it possible for many of us to come and study away from home music, and taught us always to remember who we are, and taught us all these songs. And this song I learned from her, and it says, the ancestors are overjoyed that we are celebrating our heritage. Please give a rousing scream for the great Miriam Makeba. And please say hello to this young man. I just met him this afternoon. We rehearsed for 5 minutes. His name is... His name is Lonwabo. Please give him another round of applause.